This is the Cedar Creek Church Living It Out podcast, a midweek reminder where we discuss key takeaways and principles from the weekend message to help you live out the truth that you matter.
Well, hey, everybody, and welcome to the Living It Out podcast, a weekly podcast to help remind you that you matter and to help you live out that truth throughout the week. My name is Casey, and I am your host today. And today I am joined by Ben Bockert and Marna Ward, our Next Steps team at Cedar Creek Church. Pumped that they're here with us today. This weekend, we just started a brand new series called The Great Divide. We are headed into election season, and it's not just election season. It's one of those election seasons that we have every 4 years. And everybody is always very polarized, and there's just a lot of what seems to be divisiveness going on in our world today. And so we felt like as a church, we have a responsibility to step into those topics that you all are talking about with your friends and your families and your neighbors. We should be talking about those things at church too. And so this weekend, our lead pastor, Ben Snyder, did an incredible job of stepping into that conversation. And the way he introduced it, I thought was really fun and kind of funny. He talks about this 3-word phrase that when you hear, it makes you cringe a little bit. It's like, can we talk? Or we have to talk. You know, those words don't always feel so great. So here's my opening question for Marna and Ben, and for all of you listening, I want you to think about this too. Worst breakup story, because we need to talk usually means you're getting dumped or something bad happened. So worst breakup story. This will be really fun because they didn't know I was asking this question beforehand. So here we go.
It totally means you're getting dumped. Like, that is the quintessential phrase. Oh, my worst breakup was probably in college, because you kind of, you feel like you're starting to okay, is this the person for me? And I just got dumped, period. And it was terrible. It was terrible. So at the end of my sophomore year, and but it's like one of those, of course, now you're like, oh, thank goodness. But at the time it was devastating. You're like, what? How? I don't even understand how this happened. And things were so fantastic. And just the usual stuff. But it really, you're right. That phrase still sparks in me a little ooh, it's never good.
Never
good. Never good.
Yeah, those awesome. For the most part, you never want to hear those words, can we talk? Yeah, my worst breakup story, and part of it is the timing of it. And so this was, college age, or so, and had dated this girl, I don't know how long, maybe a year or so. And it was Valentine's Day. So she was out of town, she was a student. She came back from some trip or something, and then hey, we need to talk. And I was like, okay, yeah, and totally oblivious to anything, things are great, right? So then you hear those words, and all of a sudden it's like, uh-oh, maybe things aren't going as I had thought. So and then yeah, Valentine's Day on top of it. So
that's perfect.
I don't think that was intentional or anything. It just happened to be the day that it all went down.
Man.
And I probably had there's probably, who knows, there was probably a lot that went into it. Maybe I forgot to get a card or something.
Reflect on it a little bit. Realize more going on. Yeah, that's awesome. Being dumped is never fun, but I feel like those words can we talk or we need to talk usually is never followed by good news. And it was kind of funny this weekend. Ben started off with that and really then transitioned into a conversation as a church, we got to talk about this because this is what's happening in our world. So Ben introduced this conversation as one that is necessary and one that we need to be having because there are so many complex issues going on in our world. So I was excited to step in this conversation. Ben and Marna, I know you guys were as well. And the first thing Ben kind of talked about this weekend was the idea of what's the goal of the church, right? So what is the point of the church? Would you guys just want to quickly recap some of Ben's thoughts on that? What's the purpose of the church anyway? Why are we here?
Yeah, I love that. I think that's so important coming into this conversation about the Great Divide too, because depending on what you feel like the church either should or should not be, or what it does or doesn't do, can really color the way that you see us, be it us as Cedar Creek or just the capital C church stepping into some of those things. And I think one of the things that we have really hung on to is that the church, the local church, really is the hope of the world. And that's such a big statement when you think about it. But yet that really reflects our deep-seated commitment and belief that Jesus is the way, the life, and the truth. And so I think just within that statement, I think it's really important that if we say, hey, if the local church is the hope of the world, and he even stepped further into that in terms of, and if Jesus overcame the world, then for us to be able to talk about anything, just like Jesus did, I think is really important. So that was one of the things that really stood out for me, is that this is why it's so important for us to talk about what the world is and looks like. Is if Jesus overcame the world and we're the ones that are carrying that hope, then we really do have a responsibility. And in some ways, we're really invited in to talk about the things that aren't always comfortable. In fact, probably more so than the things that are.
Yeah, and I know Ben, he referenced John 10:10, where he talks about the thief, and the thief is here to kill, destroy, and steal, and really divide and separate and keep you from the life that God wants you to have. So I thought that was a great point. Like, there are forces out there, there's Jesus who wants to give us the full life, and then there's the thief who wants to keep us from that, and he'll use anything he can to divide us, and I think that's a lot of things that we talked about this weekend, and we're going to continue to talk about over the next couple of weeks. Is, hey, here's some things that are out there that the enemy will use to divide you. So it's really important for us to, hey, let's establish what that comment, that what Jesus is asking us to do, what we as a church, when we come together, can kind of unite behind.
And Ben, you were going to say it right there, but that common unity, and I love this weekend when Ben did that word, like, essentially creates the word community. It's a group of people that have common unity, and that's what the church is about. And so then we have to step into a conversation. What are we unified on, and where is Jesus leading us to be unified? And this weekend, Ben referenced Matthew 10:34, that says, don't imagine that I came to bring peace to earth. I came to bring peace. I came not to bring peace, but a sword. So I think that's a little interesting, right? Because we're like common unity, and then Jesus comes out here and says, I didn't come to bring peace. And you think of common unity and you think of peace, right? We all agree. Isn't that what that means? Break that down for us a little bit, guys. What does that actually mean?
Yeah, it makes me think of the slide this weekend that it was like, community does not equal conformity, sort of thing. And I think you're right that in many ways is what we see as building peace, or as being in community with people, means that we would be in total agreement about all things. But I think one of the things that I really loved this unpack of that Matthew 10, and really saying, I mean, Jesus was really stepping into these places that were providing either security or protection or provision in that cultural time, which was most often their family line. I mean, it was sort of land and family line, but family line came way ahead of everything else. And so when he stepped into that, and as Ben talked about, it's like, here's what he was pushing into, was anything outside of him that was going to give us those, really the false sense of security or hope or provision or comfort. And so that's really what the sword was meant to do, was for him. He really, in many ways, was distinguishing who he was in our life, and what that meant as it relates to those sort of things that we all desire, but that he really had the ultimate authority over those. So, man, that was such a, like, wow. Okay, can you imagine receiving that teaching in the midst of that sort of, I mean, all of us have a lot of, or I would say, family ties that could lead us to think about that, but that would have been really tough for that audience to hear. And it's not necessarily easier for us to hear when he started pushing into some of the earthly things that it might not be family for us, but it's something.
Yeah, when you think about that first century family, like what that meant, and like, it wasn't just like your nuclear family of your mom and your dad and your brothers and sisters, but it was like their family was like extended. I mean, a lot of them were living in the same house or in the same group of housing. So like, they had the patriarch of their grandparents were kind of the head of the household, and everything you did was about family. So you think about who you married, it didn't really matter if it benefited you, but if it benefited the family, like that was what it, was about, because I think there was a sense of security that came with that, a sense of identity as well. So if someone got sick or they weren't able to work anymore, the family really kind of came alongside and helped support each other. So there was security in there as well, and it really kind of helped direct, hey, this is the steps I take. I'm not going to move away because that would dishonor the family. Like, we're in this together. So family was really important back then, and I think Ben talked about that, that idea of identity, security, and sense of direction moving forward too. All that a lot of people still do look to their family for that, and they definitely did to the audience that Jesus was speaking to at that time.
I was just going to say, it's kind of funny to look back at this and think about how all of us, whether it's our family or the people who raised us, like our views of how we see the world are often shaped by the way we grew up. Nature and nurture, those things work together, but our nurture is a big part of that. And I think Jesus is speaking to the nurture that those people would have experienced at that time, which was one that said, hey, your family's important, but Jesus, me, this life that I'm helping you experience is above all else. And that's the common unity that we find is Jesus, his life, his death, and his resurrection. His life living perfect, loving people no matter who they are, his death as a sacrifice, and then his resurrection as a sign of new life for those of us that put our faith and trust in him. And that becomes the most important thing. That becomes the thing that we can find common unity on. And for the most part, what I love about that is I've got friends that go to different churches, work at different churches, and they've got different strategies and different ways of doing things. We're going to talk about more of that in a second. But the common unity that we find is, oh, you're seeing Jesus change people's lives too? That's really cool. And I love that. And so I think for all of us, let's just take a second and sit in that for a second. Our common unity is Jesus. So liberal, conservative, I hate this, I love that, I believe you should do this, I believe you shouldn't do that, whatever buzzword you want to throw in there, the common unity always comes back to Jesus. Now, that's not so much the easy part, but that's kind of the easier part of the conversation. And then Ben stepped into, okay, now we have to decide and talk about how are we going to talk about the other things, because we can't just be like, yeah, Jesus is great, because the reality is our world around us is not just talking about how great Jesus is all the time. There are other topics that come up and that happen. And so we have to step into these conversations and ask ourselves, how do we navigate this? We got to talk about that. So Ben introduced an idea this weekend. We talked about it before. I remember hearing this when I was a little kid, actually, at CedarCreek. I was probably like a middle school student, and I think Lee Powell gave a weekend message on closed and open-handed, just issues and topics. And so this weekend, Ben introduced the idea of like closed-handed and open-handed. Closed-handed issues being the things that are really important, so important that we're holding on to it. We're gonna fight for this. Like, this is the most important thing. I would say for most of us, that's Jesus. And then there's the open-handed things. There's all of these other things that are still important, but they come from multiple perspectives. We should be open to talking about them because these aren't the issues that we're going to let divide us. So let's talk a little bit about that, like closed-handed, open-handed. How do you guys look at that? How do you handle that? Maybe even an example from your own life, how you've seen Christians or other people outside of the church even handle some of those issues and what they hold open and hold closed.
Yeah, I think what's most helpful for me about that is that I think is that this open hand can be places for conversation, for sharing of perspective, for understanding how someone's background, ethnicity, their socioeconomic, their education, like all of that becomes a place where you can learn so much and have great conversation. And I don't have to be like I don't have to defend anything. I don't have to feel like, I think there's this sense almost like, and maybe this was some of the in and out, or this might even be my personality in terms of like, I think there's a right and wrong here, but I think what that illustration allows me to do is to put the most important thing here in that closed fist, and to say it was to love God and to love others. And the rest of that, then I can have all sorts of conversations. I can invite people into my life or into my home or some of those things because I have this in my closed fist. If I have two open hands on that, then I might get I might get shaky on that, or I might not understand what's most important, or my priorities might get a little out of whack. So I think those are the places where I really appreciate, one, that there's not all that much that's in the closed fist. So that's one thing. And then the other is that that's what allows me to be able to love just like crazy and not have to be to really be able to represent what's in the closed fist, which is what Jesus told us to do. And so those, I think that's how that helps me to navigate some of that, is that number one, it's not on me. I'm really going to rely on him to tell me what's in the closed fist and what's in the open hand. And then from there, really try and live that out with whoever I come into, really whoever he puts in my path too. I mean, some of it is I've got to trust that he's inviting me to have those conversations for a reason too. So that's what it does for me.
Yeah, no, as you were talking through that, and you were like, there's really not a whole lot probably that we keep in the closed fist, and I think that was a big takeaway for me. I think like that closed fist is really Jesus, and like he's above all. And I think that was the point, like that Jesus was making in this talk too, was like, in what his message was, you're my call to follow me potentially is going to separate homes. It's going to, impact families. It's going to impact what you think is so important. Not that it's not important, but that's not where your security and your identity really comes from. It comes from me alone, and that's what should be in our closed hand. So if our family is not in a closed hand, like, okay, well, what is? And I think that's what when you said that, Marna, like there's really not a whole lot in our closed hand. I think that's something that, okay, so what am I holding closely that I probably need to be open-handed with? Is kind of the journey that I was intrigued to start going on this weekend, I think. And I'll probably take some time to really discover what those things are and then start releasing them.
Ben, I love that, Ben. Thanks for being vulnerable and sharing some of that. I think for all of us listening right now, that's probably a great next step, is to just evaluate what is in your open hand and what is in your closed hand. And not that it makes any of those things right or wrong, but just to identify and say, where am I right now? What things are in my closed hand? What are some of those things in my closed hand that maybe I need to open up a little bit and just hear someone else's perspective on that? And I think that's totally a great, healthy next step as we step into trying to bridge that divide. Ben asked this weekend some questions. Am I potentially close-handed around the wrong things? As Marna mentioned earlier, what are the things that I'm potentially finding my security, my value, my identity, my direction in other than God? Is it money? Is it recognition? Is it a job? Is it family? Is it my country? Is it a political party? Like what is it? And just to be honest too, I mean, I have to do this. We all have to do this all the time. This isn't something that I think sometimes people think people on church, they've figured it out. They're going to vote one way or they're going to vote another way, and it's just not true. Ben mentioned this weekend, we have so many people that have differing views on our staff alone. I mean, I've had some pretty heated conversations with our staff members, but they're good, life-giving conversations around these open-handed topics. Ben, your brother Brian is one of them. I love talking to Brian. We always have great conversations, spirited debate, right? So I guess for you guys, what does that look like, right? Because it's like, okay, great, I'm gonna hold on to Jesus, but then the other things are gonna be a little more open-handed. Maybe you have some convictions, some things that are really important to you. Like, how do you handle those things? What if I'm passionate about something and I'm passionate about making a difference about something that is driven by Jesus, but for some people it might be an open-handed issue. How do you navigate that?
Yeah, those are the toughest spots, right? I mean, that's where you start to find yourself like really rising, I think, to how uh like we want to put more and more in the closed fist. So I think number one for me, what I really have to do in that situation is remember that I'm talking to a person, and I'm not talking to the issue or the world or I don't know, capitalize the and put whatever you want after it, because I think that's where it gets tough for me. Like, especially if I have people in my life who are really passionate about a topic that I don't know that I hold in a closed fist, or I potentially don't see it their way. I really do try and remember, like, who's the person that is saying this to me? What's their heart behind it? That's that learning posture and that curiosity. I don't always get this right for sure. And there's definitely times where I just don't want to have the conversation, or it's like, it's not even worth it. But I think just really remembering that what's my goal here is the question that I find myself asking a lot in those situations. So even within our own family dynamics, it's like, well, what's the goal? Like, what do I hope to accomplish here? And there's lots that I sometimes have to like dig through in terms of like, that's probably not the right target to head after. So I would say, just even as Ben was talking about, it's like, man, it's just getting really clear about what is my goal in those interactions, what is in the closed fist, but even to the point that what's in the closed fist becomes a place where I'm still inviting people to meet Jesus in that space and not making it about me. Those are the hardest spots. Like, I just find when my emotions rise, when I get defensive, when I stop learning, is when it becomes all about me. And I'm not saying that that's necessarily bad. Like we were saying, it's not that those things aren't important or that you can't have those conversations, but I think just getting really clear about why and what's the goal. And especially if you've done the work to say, this is what's in the closed fist and what's going to lead and guide me. I just think that's so much work that a lot of us have to do, not just one time, but that becomes part of this whole piece of like, if I'm really going to follow Jesus, what does that look like? So those are some of the spaces I find myself in.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think you know, when I think about this message, Ben said this one line that kind of wrote it down. He said, when you begin to find your security in him, your value in him, then you begin to let him be the primary authority that determines the direction you're going to go. So just that idea of continuing to put him first, daily. He's the one in the closed hand, like above all else. That's who I choose to follow today. In this conversation, I choose to follow him. In this complex issue, I'm going to just give it to him and let him help me determine what the truth is. And that probably sounds easier than it is. But to daily, take up your cross, to just really just say, hey, all these complex issues are above my, ability to really even figure it all out on my own. I really need wisdom from above, and let God guide you. So,
yeah, that's great. That's super helpful for both of you guys. I took some notes as I was even listening. I know Ben mentioned this weekend to listen, to learn, and to love them well. And here's something I was reflecting on as you guys were both teaching or talking. The close-handed issue that should be the most important is Jesus. And ultimately, when that's close-handed, that should affect the way that we love everybody else. It should affect the way we treat those open-handed issues, and it should treat the way we treat the close-handed issue too. And I think about that, and I unfortunately, my experience and even my reaction sometimes with some of those close-handed things that maybe I've held on to is not always the best. And it doesn't always come off as kind, doesn't always come off as I'm trying to listen, I'm trying to learn, I'm trying to love you. Like Marna just said, like it comes from a prideful place that I'm right, this is my experience, you better hear me, you better hear my thought, you better hear my experience, because here's what I think. When in reality, yes, you're gonna have more influence in people, but just relationships are stronger when you can stop and listen and say back what the person said to you and say, is this where you're coming from? Is this what you said? And then love them through it, even if you disagree. And that's a hard thing to do. And we're going to continue these conversations over the next couple of weeks because we recognize that this is not easy. I've got two friends that are both on opposite sides of the political spectrum, and they're friends. They're friends with one another. They go to our church, and their families are friends with one another. And I think it's the most fascinating, coolest. I love it because it's like these two people, individuals or families, have put these open-handed issues that they both are passionate about in a lot of ways aside enough that they still talk about them. They still have heated conversation. They still debate, but they do life together because that's so important to them. That's a non-negotiable. It's like, we're going to love each other and do life, but we're going to disagree, and that's okay. And I think as we talk about this concept of the great divide, man, my challenge for all of you today is to listen, to learn, and to love them well. To identify the places in your life where what am I holding on to that maybe I don't need to hold on to, that needs to be in more of the conversation, open-handed argument. And then really just to keep leaning into this series, because over the next couple of weeks, Ben's going to get more into it, and it'll be more detailed. This weekend was kind of like an overarch, like unity, common unity. This is what we're looking for, which is great. But some of those more nitty-gritty conversations that are tough, they're going to be good for us, all of us. And so, as we said in the beginning, yes, we need to talk, but I would say this: we get to talk. We get to talk about these things, and I believe it is going to be helpful for me, for all of us, for our staff, for our church, in a season that does seem so polarized. It seems so divisive, and as followers of Jesus, we have a responsibility to unify people in the love that we've experienced through Jesus. And so that's the way we're going to lead. And I'm excited to continue the conversation. Ben, Martin, do you guys have any other thoughts on just any of this conversation we've had today?
I was thinking as you were talking, Casey, about taking communion together. And I think how that's the full representation of what it looks like to be in unity, that no matter where we come from, no matter what we've been through, no matter our views, no matter what, that we can all come to that table, that we're all invited there, and to really take part in that. I thought it was such a beautiful representation. I know it's so tough during this season when it's like there's all these other things that we're kind of navigating, but it was like, man, that picture of coming to the table together, I think that's what we all long for, is that we all want to be in, right, on that in and out sort of deal. But Jesus made it possible for all of us to be in, and to take that communion together, I think can be such a representation of that I wonder if even in the next time I'm in conflict with somebody, if I can just keep that image in my mind of is this going to bring us to the table to be able to do this together, or am I ultimately doing something that's going to divide? So sometimes the pictures help me too, when the emotions are running way ahead of me.
Oh, that's great. I think, yeah, I would just say if you, most likely if you're listening to this, you did catch the weekend service. But I had a chance to listen to it again today, and there's just a ton of content and great stuff in there. So, we talked about idols and what those are, anything that we find security, value, or direction from other than God, which is, a lot of times what is in the closed hand that should be open. So, I mean, there's just a lot of great stuff. So, continue to have conversations about this, listen to the talk again, read the Living It Out. All those things will help, us continue to keep this content in our mind as we move forward in this series.
Absolutely. And as we continue to move on this adventure, I think for all of us, we want to be people who people don't hate talking to these things about, right? We want to be people that people enjoy talking to, that feel love from, they feel compassion from, they feel understood from. Last night I was with some family. I had my aunts in town, and my aunt and I had a great conversation about some of the divisive topics in our country right now. And I just, at the end of it, I appreciated her perspective, not because she had any thought-provoking things or anything that really challenged any of my thoughts. She just listened really, really well, and she asked really good questions. She's a counselor, so that's what she does all the time. But just her ability, if there's something attractive about that, there's something that makes you want to. I was there for 5 hours. No one wants to have a 5-hour conversation about divisive topics, but when you're listened to, when you have good conversation, obviously it's my family too, so I love them. But man, there is something attractive about a person. I mean, that's Jesus, right? Jesus stepped into the mess all the time. We think our political world is a mess. Back then, man, they had so much political divisiveness happening between cultures, and Jesus stepped right into the middle of it, and people loved him, and people appreciated the conversation. So I think we can do that. It's just all about our posture. It's about how we head into those things. So this was a good conversation. So Marna, Ben, thank you guys so much for having it today. I enjoyed that. That was fun. As we kind of wrap up and head out here today, We have a super, super exciting event coming up. I'm really excited about it. We're actually like canceling our Saturday night services for it. We're gonna be having a men's event on Saturday, November 7th. Marna, do you want to talk a little bit about what's going to be happening at the men's event?
Yeah, so one of the reasons that I want to talk about this is because I know that not having the 5 o'clock service definitely impacts somebody like me. And yet I'm pretty pumped that we're just taking this pause to really go, okay, guys, I think it's an opportunity for you to come together to talk about the kind of things that really men can just gather together and have a great conversation about that is a little probably different than the weekend. And I'm watching all the things that are coming together for this, like axe throwing, Deets barbecue, there's going to be fire pits, there's a cigar deal. Like this feels like it's going to be pretty fun for the guys that I know in my life. So
Cigars?
there's even going to be cigars.
Man,
Yep.
this is a
So,
man.
yep.
I'm
So
in.
it's sort of a like bring your own cigar, but if you forget your cigar, we
Yeah.
might have an option for you to be able to get one. So, but I
Awesome.
think those are just the really important things to remember that we felt like as a church, it was important for us to take this step. So whether you are listening to this and are somebody who would attend, or you've got somebody in your life, it's not the event for you, but you've got people in mind. It's such an easy invite to like, hey, my church is having this event and like they're doing some pretty cool stuff. And Brian Tome is going to be speaking, which Brian is the quintessential adventurer. This guy does some pretty crazy and radical stuff to get people to really pay attention to Jesus, number one, but number two, to really understand what that means for them in their life as men specifically, but just that whole adventure piece for him, I think is going to be really fun for the guys to hear from. So
Dude,
that's what I know about the men's event.
I'm pumped. I'm super excited. I didn't know some of those things. I really all was told to get people there, so I'm getting people there.
Yeah. No, I heard Deets barbecue and I'm like, okay, whatever, I'm
I'm
there for
in.
sure.
No, I did on Thursday, Friday night. Oh, their mac and cheese, so good. Anyways, this is not a free commercial for Deets. It is a free commercial for the men's event though, because it's
Yes.
really fun. I am looking forward to it. Brian Tome is like, he's a man's man. He is everything that like a man's man would show. So I'm looking forward to having him. It'll be a lot of fun. Cool, Marta. Thanks for sharing some of those details. If you're a guy, get signed up. You can actually text the word men's event, all one word, to the number 419-419-0707. If you've noticed, that's like our number. And so in the future, if you ever want to sign up for anything, it's usually going to be a text to that number. We'll send you a link, or you can just go to cedarcreek.tv/men's event and get signed up there. Cool, guys. Thanks so much for being here with us. I'm looking forward to continuing this series this weekend. Ben will be with us again, and we'll be stepping into some more of this conversation. So I'm looking forward to it. Ben, Marta, thanks for joining us. We appreciate it. Great conversation today. Hope you enjoyed listening. Again, it's our hope that you are reminded that you matter, and today's conversation can help you live out that truth in some sort of way. Thank you guys so much for listening. Have a great week.